Look at this photograph. A bride and groom on their wedding day in 1910. It seems ordinary, a beautiful black couple dressed in their finest. It's preserved forever in sepia and silver. But something is hidden in this image, something experts overlooked for more than a century. The secret is in her hands. The bouquet she holds so carefully is not just a collection of flowers. It is a coded message, a dangerous message meant for someone who was never supposed to be found. What was this bride trying to say? Who was she trying to protect? And why did this photograph nearly get an entire family killed? The photograph had been sitting in the archives of the Atlanta History Center for nearly 40 years. It was part of a collection donated in 1985 by the family of a deceased minister, boxes of old documents, church records, and personal belongings spanning nearly a century of African American life in Georgia. No one paid much attention to the wedding portrait. It was cataloged, filed, and forgotten, just another image among thousands, a glimpse into the past with no particular story attached. In the fall of 2021, a doctoral student named Denise was researching the social networks of Black communities in the Jim Crow South. She was especially interested in how families communicated during times of danger during lynchings, riots, and waves of racial terror in the early 20th century. Denise spent months studying letters, diaries, and photographs, searching for patterns historians might have missed. One afternoon, while scrolling through digitized images from the minister's collection, she stopped. The wedding portrait caught her attention immediately, not because of the couple, though they were striking, but because of the bouquet. Denise had studied Victorian flower symbolism as part of her research. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, flowers were often used to send messages, a practice called florography. But the flowers in this bride's hands were unusual. They were not the typical roses, lilies, and orange blossoms seen in most wedding portraits of the era. These flowers were specific, deliberate, unusual. Red amaranth, white oleander, yellow acacia, and blue salvia. Denise's heart began to race. She had seen references to these flowers before, not in wedding manuals or etiquette guides, but in coded communications used by a secret network that operated in the South during the darkest years of Jim Crow. She leaned closer to her screen, studying the bride's face. "Who were you?" Denise whispered. "And what were you trying to say?" Over the next week, Denise immersed herself in research, gathering everything she could find about floral codes used by Black communities in the post-Reconstruction South. What she discovered was remarkable. After slavery ended, African Americans in the South developed complex systems of covert communication. Some were verbal coded spirituals, double-meaning phrases, warnings disguised as gossip. Others were visual symbols carved into fence posts, patterns in quilts hung on clotheslines, and flower arrangements placed in windows or carried in plain sight. These codes had roots in the Underground Railroad, but evolved in the decades that followed, adapting to new dangers. From 1890 to 1920. It was one of the bloodiest periods in American history for Black citizens. Lynchings were common, often sparked by rumors or wounded pride. Entire communities could be destroyed in a single night of violence. In that climate of terror, information meant survival. Knowing when to flee, where to hide, and who could be trusted could mean the difference between life and death. Denise found references to a network that operated across Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, a loose group of churches, families, and community leaders who passed warnings and coordinated escapes. They called themselves the gardeners, and their main method of communication was flowers. Each flower carried a specific meaning. Red amaranth meant danger. Leave immediately. White oleander meant the path is clear. Yellow acacia meant trust this person. Blue salvia meant message received. Help is coming. A bouquet combining all four flowers sent a powerful message. There is danger, but the path is clear. Trust the bearer. Help is on the way. Denise looked again at the wedding photograph. The bride was holding exactly that combination. This was not just a bouquet. It was a signal. But who was she signaling? And what danger was she warning about? Denise knew she needed more information. The photograph alone could not tell the full story. She needed names, dates, and context. She returned to the archives and requested access to the full collection from the minister's estate. 3 days later, she sat in a climate-controlled reading room surrounded by boxes of documents that smelled of age and dust. The minister's name was Reverend Isaiah. He had led a Baptist church in rural Georgia from 1925 until his death in 1984. His papers included sermons, church bulletins, and personal correspondence, decades of a life devoted to faith and community. Buried among the official records were older items passed down through generations, letters from the early 1900s and photographs of people long gone. In a small leather journal, its pages brittle and faded, Denise found something unexpected. She opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was elegant but hurried, as if written under pressure. The first entry was dated March 3rd, 1910. My name is Bessie. I am writing this so that someone will know the truth, even if I cannot speak it aloud. The danger is coming closer. We have received word that they are looking for my sister Ruth. I do not know what she did or did not do, but it does not matter. When they come for one of us, guilt is decided before the trial. There is no trial. There is only rope and fire. Denise's hands trembled as she turned the pages. We have made a plan. Ruth will leave tonight. The gardeners have prepared the way, but I must stay behind. I am to be married in 3 months. My wedding will be the signal. The flowers I carry will tell everyone who sees the photograph. Ruth is gone. The path was clear. She is safe. Denise looked again at the wedding portrait. The bride's name was Bessie, and her bouquet was a message to an entire network confirming that her sister had escaped. But escaped from what? The journal revealed the full horror of what had happened in the spring of 1910. Bessie's sister, Ruth, worked as a seamstress for a white family in town, the only job available to black women that paid more than field labor. She was skilled, quiet, and careful. She knew the rules of survival in the Jim Crow South. Never look a white person in the eye. Never speak unless spoken to. Never give anyone a reason to notice you. But none of that mattered when the family's teenage son accused Ruth of stealing a silver brooch. Ruth had stolen nothing. The brooch was later found in the boy's own room, hidden beneath his mattress. But by then, it was too late. The accusation had already spread. Word moved through the white community like wildfire, becoming more distorted with each retelling. Within days, the story changed from theft to something worse, whispers of improper behavior, of a black woman who had forgotten her place. A group of white men began gathering in the evenings, drinking and talking about teaching her a lesson. Bessie learned of it from a sympathetic white shopkeeper who had treated the black community fairly. His warning was direct. Get your sister out of town tonight. They are coming for her tomorrow. That night, Ruth vanished. The gardeners had arranged everything, a wagon waiting at the edge of town, safe houses along the northern route, contacts in Atlanta who would help her board a train to Chicago. Within a week, Ruth was beyond the reach of the men who wanted her dead. But the danger was not over. The mob was furious that their target had escaped. They demanded answers. Someone must have helped her. Someone must know where she had gone. Bessie's family was questioned and threatened. Their home was searched. They revealed nothing. The code held. 3 months later, Bessie married James, a deacon in Reverend Isaiah's father's church. She walked down the aisle, carrying a bouquet that told the entire network the mission was complete. Ruth was safe. The gardeners had succeeded. Denise kept reading, fast, and with each page, the scope of the gardeners' network became clearer. Bessie had not been a passive participant. She was a key member of the organization, using her position as a respected young woman in the community to gather information and coordinate escapes. The journal documented dozens of operations over the years, men and women taken away in the night, warned of approaching violence, or hidden until danger passed. Some had been accused of crimes they did not commit. Others had simply drawn the wrong kind of attention. A black man, too successful in business. A black woman who rejected the advances of a white employer. The gardeners operated with precision. They had scouts who watched white gatherings for signs of trouble. They maintained safe houses along northern routes. They had contacts in cities such as Atlanta, Chicago, and Detroit who could provide jobs and housing for those who escaped. And they communicated through flowers. Each arrangement formed a sentence in a silent language. Red amaranth appeared in windows when danger was near. White oleander was placed on graves to signal that a path was clear. Yellow acacia was woven into wreaths to identify trusted allies. Blue salvia was carried at funerals, weddings, and church events to confirm that messages had been received to outsiders. These were decorations, expressions of beauty and celebration. To those who understood the code, they were a lifeline. Denise realized the wedding photograph was not simply a personal memento. It was a historical document, evidence of a resistance movement that had operated in plain sight for decades, and it was only the beginning. Denise knew she needed to find Bessie's living descendants. The archives could only tell part of the story. To understand the whole truth, she needed to speak with those who had inherited the memories. She began tracing the genealogy, following branches of the family tree through census records, marriage certificates, and obituaries. Reverend Isaiah, whose collection contained the photograph, turned out to be Bessie's grandson, the son of her eldest daughter. From there, Denise located living relatives across Georgia, Chicago, and California. She contacted them one by one, explaining her research and asking if they would share their family stories. The response was overwhelming. Within weeks, Denise received letters, emails, and phone calls. Many descendants had heard fragments of the story, whispered references to earlier times, to relatives who had gone north, to a network that kept people safe during dangerous years. But no one had ever assembled all the pieces. One call stood out. It came from a woman named Gloria in Chicago. She was 91 years old, and she had information that Denise desperately needed. That information. "I knew Bessie," Gloria said, her voice thin but clear. "She was my grandmother, and I know about the flowers. She taught me when I was a girl, before she died. She said it was important to remember, even if we hoped we would never need to use it again." Denise flew to Chicago the following week. She sat in Gloria's living room, surrounded by family photographs spanning nearly a century, and listened as the elderly woman told her story. "The bouquet in that wedding picture saved my great-aunt Ruth's life," Gloria said. "But it also nearly destroyed our family, because the white men who wanted Ruth never stopped looking for her." Answers. Gloria described a chapter of family history that had never been written, down to painful and too dangerous to record. After Ruth's escape, the mob's anger turned toward those who remained. They could not prove that Bessie's family had helped Ruth disappear, but they did not need proof. Suspicion was enough. In the months that followed, the family endured a campaign of terror. Their barn was burned. Their livestock was killed. Threatening notes were left at their door. James, Bessie's new husband, was beaten by masked men who warned him to keep his wife in line. But the family did not break. They did not leave. They stayed and continued working with the gardeners, even as the danger increased. "My grandmother used to say that leaving would have been a betrayal," Gloria explained. "They had built something important away to save lives. If they ran, who would take their place? Who would carry the flowers?" The persecution lasted for years, but gradually it faded. The men who had hunted Ruth grew old or moved away. New concerns replaced old grudges. The family survived, quietly continuing their work and never speaking of it to outsiders. Bessie lived until 1967. She was 90 years old when she died, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. In her final years, she began teaching the flower code to the youngest generation, not because she expected them to need it, but because she believed memory was sacred. She said the flowers were our ancestors' gift to us, Gloria said, tears streaming down her face. A way of protecting each other when no one else would. She made me promise to remember, and I have. All my life, I have remembered. But what had happened to Ruth the sister, whose escape had set everything in motion? Denise asked, and Gloria smiled. Ruth lived, she said simply. She lived a long, full life. The Gardner Network brought Ruth safely to Chicago in the spring of 1910. She arrived with nothing but the clothes she wore and the address of a contact who helped her find work. Within a year, she established herself as a seamstress, using the same skills that had once placed her in danger to build a new life. She married a man named William, a Pullman porter who traveled the country by rail. They had 4 children together. Ruth never returned to Georgia. It was too dangerous. The men who wanted her dead had long memories, and she knew her presence would only bring trouble to the family she left behind. Instead, she stayed connected in other ways. Letters were too risky, so she sent messages through the network flowers delivered by trusted couriers. Each arrangement carried news of her health, her happiness, and her growing family. Bessie received those messages and replied in kind. The 2 sisters maintained a silent conversation that lasted for decades. They saw each other again in 1952. After the last of the men who had threatened them had died, Ruth traveled to Georgia for a family reunion. Gloria had been a teenager then, and she remembered the moment clearly. They just held each other and cried, she said. No words, just tears. Then her grandmother brought out a bouquet she had prepared, same flowers from her wedding portrait all those years earlier. She handed it to Ruth and said, "You're finally home." Denise published her research the following year. The story of Bessie, Ruth, and the Gardners drew national attention. Historians praised it as an important contribution to understanding Black resistance during the Jim Crow era. The photograph from Bessie's wedding was reproduced in newspapers, magazines, and academic journals around the world. What had once been an overlooked image in an archive became a symbol of courage, ingenuity, and survival for the family's descendants. The impact was deeply personal. Denise organized a reunion, bringing together relatives from both branches of the family, the descendants of Bessie, who remained in Georgia, and the descendants of Ruth, who built new lives in the North. More than 100 people gathered in Atlanta on a warm spring day. They met cousins they had never known and heard stories they had never been told. Gloria, now 92, addressed the group. Our grandmothers and great-grandmothers lived in a time when loving each other was an act of resistance, she said. They could not march in the streets or vote at the ballot box, but they could carry flowers. They could send messages. They could save each other's lives, one secret signal at a time. That is our inheritance. That is who we are. The family decided to create a foundation in Bessie and Ruth's names, dedicated to preserving the history of Black resistance movements and supporting communities affected by racial violence. The logo featured 4 flowers: red amaranth, white oleander, yellow acacia, and blue salvia arranged in a circle. The secret language of the Gardners had become a public symbol of hope. On the anniversary of Bessie's wedding, 112 years after she walked down the aisle carrying a coated bouquet, the family gathered at her grave in rural Georgia. The headstone was simple, weathered by decades of rain and sun. The family added a bronze plaque engraved with the 4 flowers of the Gardner Code. One by one, the descendants placed fresh flowers on her grave: red amaranth, white oleander, yellow acacia, and blue salvia. The arrangement was identical to the one Bessie carried in 1910. A young woman named Maya, one of Ruth's great-great-granddaughters. Maya read a letter she had written for the occasion. Dear Bessie, she began, you never met me, but I am here because of you, because you chose to stay when it would have been safer to run, because you carried flowers that told my great-great-grandmother the path was clear, because you kept the secret for 60 years until it was safe for your sister to come home. I am proof that your sacrifice mattered. My children will be proof, and their children after them. The message you sent has been received, not only by Ruth, but by all of us. We hear you, we remember you, and we will carry your flowers forward. The wind stirred the blossoms on the grave, scattering petals across the grass. For a moment, it seemed as if the photograph had come to life, the bride in her white dress, the bouquet in her hands, her eyes no longer solemn, but shining with joy. A century of silence had ended. A secret written in flowers had finally been read by the world. Some photographs capture a moment. Others carry a message across time, waiting for the right person to understand. Bessie's message had been received, and it would never be forgotten.